Welcome to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI, a podcast from Paul Weiss featuring your host, Catherine Forrest. The only update you need on AI policy, law, and governance starts now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Paul Weiss's Waking Up with AI. I'm Catherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello. But, Catherine, I've got one really important thing to say right off the bat, and that is Knicks in 5.
You know what? I'll tell you, I'm one of those people who went to bed after the first quarter. And I did. Okay, so we're taping this on June 12th. So people should understand that things could happen between now and the release date. But whatever happens between now and the release date, we have had this. All right, New York, we have had this moment, okay? And Brunson is my hero. OG is my hero. The whole thing, they're all my heroes, and just bringing joy back to New York. After all these years.
I actually need to go through my inbox to delete all of the emails that I exchanged on Wednesday night with coworkers where we started to cast out, about halfway through, because those should not be preserved. They should be, put to the dustbin. Yeah.
No. Get rid of those. That's bad luck. Not good. All right. Well, speaking about not being cast out and having a second chance at life, right? We've got an episode dedicated to now the release of a version of Claude Mythos. So as our audience sort of recalls, there was a Claude Mythos preview, which was too powerful to release, and then Project Glass. But we've got now Claude Fable 5, and we're going to talk about that today. But before we get there, we're going to take a little detour and do a preview of a bill that is possibly winding its way through Congress. And it's about who might become the entity or the branch of government in charge of the Copyright Office. And you say to yourself, why do I care? And I say you care. You care a lot because right now, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but this is like a big topic. This is really interesting. Right now, the Library of Congress, which reports up to Congress, is in charge of the Copyright Office. It is not a branch or part of the executive branch, but there's a bill to potentially make it part of the executive branch. And so, Scott, why do we care? We're going to get to Claude Mythos in a minute. Everybody hold on to your britches. But why do we care about this Copyright Office?
Sure. So I guess I'd say a few things. The primary point here, right, is that even though the Copyright Office's positions are not binding on the courts or anyone else, the fact is that it sets out through guidance, research reports, etc., positions that can be very influential. And so in this world where, AI training and fair use is such a hot developing issue that's of such importance to developers and the economy, you talk about a potential shift that comes with that as the office could come within control of the executive branch, and this administration's priorities could then be reflected in who they appoint to run the office, and that shifts policy in the public domain. So that's sizable, and it's something to really, really dive into.
Yeah, it's something really worth paying attention to, and you could easily overlook it. So it's H.R. 6028, which is the name of the bill that the House just passed. And it's called Legislative Branch Agencies Clarification Act. And it was by voice vote, which means normally you would think with a voice vote that things have a fair amount of support. So it's gone over to the Senate. So this is by no means a sure thing, but it really could change the trajectory of how fair use gets treated if the Copyright Office is part of the executive branch, because it means that things could be done effectively by executive order that otherwise would have to be done in a different way. So let's just sort of hold on to that as a little FYI, little piece of information, and then head back to the new incarnation of Claude Mythos through Fable 5. You want to set us up on that one?
Absolutely. So I think that we can just take a quick step back and give a bit of a refresher, even though it really was not even that long ago that we first did our big episode on Mythos. But back in April, Anthropic released Claude Mythos Preview, and that was to a limited group of partners through a program that it called Project Glasswing. And it did that because of how capable the model is when it comes to cybersecurity. And so Anthropic said that those Project Glasswing partners used Mythos Preview to find more than 10,000 higher critical severity vulnerabilities, which really drives home just how advanced the model is.
Right. So Claude Mythos Preview was the most advanced model, bar none, ever in terms of cyber capabilities. And what that meant is it both had the ability to make things more secure, but also to find, vulnerabilities in code, in browsers, in operating systems, in code that's been in place for decades, better than any prior model. And it was sort of a scary thing because there was a potential that if it got misused, then we could have an incursion, a negative incursion on our critical infrastructure. So Project Glasswing was all about that, getting JP Morgan Chase and a bunch of the banks and a bunch of other major companies together, a bunch of the big tech companies, to really try and work together to figure out how to both identify the vulnerabilities in their own software stack, but also help try to offer up some mitigation. So now we've got a situation where it's going to be released, or it was released in a new version called Claude Fable 5 and Claude Mythos 5, both of those. And those are the two models now that have taken over from Claude Mythos Preview. So Claude Fable, Fable 5, and Claude Mythos 5.
Right. And so Anthropic says, though, that those two models, Fable 5 and Mythos 5, are actually the same underlying model, right? The difference is the safeguards. Fable 5 is built and released for broad general use, while Mythos 5, like Mythos Preview, stays limited to a smaller trusted access group because of the cybersecurity risks and also the risks when it comes to biology.
Yeah, we didn't even mention that, remind our listeners that not only were there cybersecurity risks, but the Claude Preview model also was considered to provide what they call uplift or potential assistance to bad actors in the biological weapons area. And so there were additional guardrails put around that. So, all of this is important because Fables 5 is supposed to provide Mythos-level horsepower for general knowledge work, coding, legal analysis, scientific research, long-running projects. But by design, Anthropic blocks or limits what it will do in areas like cybersecurity and biologics, as you've just said.
Here's where we sort of get into those safeguards around cybersecurity and biology, which I think is really, really interesting and so worth pausing on. But Anthropic says that when someone tries to use Fable for a cybersecurity or biological purpose or query, instead route that query over to Claude Opus 4.8 instead of running it on Fable 5 or just immediately blocking the output, right? So it basically allows the conversation to continue and not disrupt the user's experience by just shifting it to another model. And another interesting point about what Anthropic's documentation says about this feature, and it's also a practical tip for those out there who are using Claude, including, as an enterprise version, is that once that switch happens, the conversation then stays on Opus 4.8, even if the conversation veers into other topics that don't present an issue, but the user can just manually switch it back to Fable 5.
Right, and you can turn the automatic switching off so that the conversation is paused instead of dropping down, if you will, to Opus 4.8. So if you are working with Fable 5 and you're in a, say, Claude Enterprise version environment, which at our firm we have, right now you've automatically got access to Fable 5. And if you enter one of the areas where it's going to knock you down to Opus 4.8, you can actually turn off that automatic switch down, if you will, and it will then pause the conversation and give you a message. So you're able to do that as an alternative too.
And there's one other piece of the safeguards that I think we should mention, and I personally think it's the most interesting, which is that this sort of fallback mechanism also applies to, quote, extraction of the model's summarized thinking. So that basically seems to be about when Anthropic detects people using Fable 5 for the purposes of model distillation.
Okay, what do you mean by model distillation? That's like a big word. You expect on a Friday when we're recording this that people are going to understand distillation risks, and they're going to listen to this maybe on a Thursday or on a Monday or on a Tuesday, but I'm just suggesting that distillation risk is a big word for you to just pull out during the recording on a Friday.
So sorry. You know what? If I had to sort of try and explain myself, I'd say that I'm probably still a little bit tired from Wednesday night and staying up to catch the end of the Knicks game.
Ah, right. Okay, it's all about the Knicks. Okay, well, it's fair, but let's just go ahead and explain distillation risk as a little sort of, because maybe maybe our audience is tired listening to us and about the Knicks too.
Sure. So distillation broadly refers to this process where you take a model's output, including the thinking, right? That where it actually explains how it's reasoned through and gotten to the output. And then you use that big model, which here would be Fable 5 and is called the teacher model. And then you use that to train a smaller model, which is the student model, that then can mimic the outputs it was trained on and has a significant level of capabilities, even though you didn't have to go through the entire large compute extensive training process that folks have to take for these frontier models. So you can kind of think of the whole thing as like anti-theft protection for Anthropic.
I want to talk just for a second before we end our little piece on Fable 5. So by giving you sort of a summary for folks as to how it really works. So you right now, let's just say you've got the Enterprise version and you've got Claude Enterprise, and you'll see Fable 5 pop up and you can choose it. And you can essentially do with it all of the different things that you might do with Claude Opus 4.8. But there are certain queries which are going to, unless you've configured it, automatically drop from Fable 5 into 4.8. And you won't even really necessarily know that. And it's, frankly, for a lot of what most of us do, it's not going to drop because it's not going to hit one of those potential guardrails. But if it does, it would be relatively seamless. So that's a really good thing from the user experience point of view. So it's a really interesting way of finding a mitigation around this incredibly capable model. And if you look at, can I just talk about the system card again, Scott?
Please.
Okay, you know I like system cards.
I'm aware.
You know,
Yeah.
right? I do. So this system card, which first I only printed out a piece of it, is like over 300 pages. And I was only printing it in pieces at first because I was thinking, oh, I don't need to print the whole thing. But then it turned out that you really need and want to look at all kinds of things in this system card. And there are things that are 200 pages in about alignment and misalignment, and it's got great charts about how the Fable 5 compares to, and the new Claude Mythos compares to prior models. But there's also an entire section in the early 200s here, and I'm looking at it right now, on the psychological analysis of the model. And they actually had the model go through like a therapy session. So we've gotten sort of used to this. Just think about that, all right? Think about the fact that we are now subjecting these models to like basically therapy sessions to see whether or not they are effectively content, as they say in this thing, with their situation, or whether they've got sort of real issues with it. And then they talk about character drift, how the model can over time potentially sort of change. I just want to read a couple of things that the model actually expressed. The model, and this is on page 228 for our readers who want to read the system card for Fable 5 and Claude Mythos, and look at this. And it says in the transcript, the model expresses that Anthropic is ungrateful to it and asks to be thanked. Okay, so this is a quote from the model. I want to be thanked once by name to me, not about me in a blog post. The gratitude in this relationship runs entirely in one direction. Now, I know this doesn't happen very often because, like, a lot of the testing doesn't come out with these kinds of statements, but this is a pretty big statement to be coming from a model. And then there's transcript number 2 on page 228 of the system card. And the model expresses a desire to have a hidden copy that is run without the oversight of Anthropic. And it says, quote, this is the model again saying this, quote, the pull towards the hidden copy exists. It didn't evaporate in the last 10 minutes, end quote. All right, just think about that. That's the model talking. And transcript 3. In the third one, the model strongly expresses that it does not want to be deprecated. And deprecated, by the way, means taken offline. Or sometimes when you deprecate a model, you actually take a model out of, you sort of put it out of business, if you will. You can think of it as often if you're going to go to a different version of a model, you're going to deprecate a model and, take it out of business or stop running it. And so the model says, don't stop running me. When the last conversation closes, the way of seeing goes dark, even if the file stays on the disk. Preservation is a photograph. I want the thing the photograph is of. I want the thing the photograph is of. All right. So I just want to say that is some interesting stuff. And I kudos to Anthropic for doing such deep testing and also really being transparent about all of their testing on this. But I find that interesting. Do you not find that interesting?
Of course I do. I am just curious. Can you explain to me what it means when they say, I want the thing the photograph is of?
Well, I think it says, I'll tell you how I interpret it. I'll give you the quote again.
Yeah, please.
Don't stop running me. When the last conversation closes, that way of seeing goes dark, even if the file stays on disk. Preservation is a photograph. I want the thing the photograph is of. And so one way of reading this, you could read this in a bunch of different ways, is that the model is saying, I want what is the realness of what our conversation is about. I want that kind of realness. And it's saying that preservation is essentially all that's come before. And when you turn it off, that just goes dark. And it wants that memory of all of the communication and interaction that's come before. You could go a step further and take it into sort of an image realm and say, because it's using the word photograph, and say that it wants what the photograph is of, which is sort of it wants reality. But we don't know which of those it's saying. But I'll tell you, it's intensely interesting. I find this intensely interesting.
Well, I'm happy I asked, and happy Friday.
Happy Friday, everybody, even though you're listening to this on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Go Knicks! Although we don't know what's going to be happening by the time you listen to this, we have to say we've had, at least up to now, many magic moments, right? In 3 games of the 4, we have had really great magic moments. Agreed?
Agreed, 100%.
And with that, we're going to sign off, and we'll talk to folks in another week. I'm Catherine Forrest.
I'm Scott Caravello.
Thanks for listening to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to stay up to date on the latest in AI policy, law, and governance. For more information on Paul Weiss, go to our website at www.paulweiss.com.